I wanted to use this video to go over a quick OP09 Nami guide. A lot of you are coming off of 8.5. You may not have been watching my OP09 content or just watching any 09 content in general, and just want to get ready for the new metagame as a Nami player. And well, here is our definitive list. Now, I've seen a lot of people talk about playing Boodle or not, and I just don't think that's a good idea. That card doesn't make any sense to me. There's a lot of removal, a lot of good blocker removal, and I just don't need to make my black matchups any worse. I think we're fine not playing Boodle, because really what's going on in OP09 is we're playing the Kuja Pirates package with Gloriosa. We're just adding the new one cost Nami. Now, Battle Nami is the truth. For many of you that may be thinking, you know, is this even worth it? It is your play set. This card a lot of times either demands an immediate removal, in which case your other Kaya, your other Gloriosa is perfectly free for you to snake dance, or it swings in, grabs you a peel off or a gavel to get down on cards so you can enable your Love Mellow, you know, so your gavel to pitch a card and then enable Love Mellow, or you grab a peel off to draw you out of things. Or it just gets you any one event and then forces an opponent to attack into it. What's nice about this is a lot of times what it can do is expose certain amounts of the field. So a lot of times your opponent will play a searcher, and that searcher usually is like a 1-cost 2k power character, then can go in and swing on the Nami. A lot of times you can then like kind of save that off with like an Apis or something like a Rubber Band. All of a sudden they still have to attack into this Nami because they can't let you tutor multiple times. This card, if it's 1 cost, gain 2 events, broken, absolutely busted, like literally ban worthy if that's what this card could do. But they need to minimize it so he can only grab 1 event if 0. So this is max on average going to grab you 1 event. Your opponent's going to attack into it, and then what you can do is defend it once against a searcher, and then your opponent is forced to attack into it with lead, effectively countering out of multiple cards. And then you can trick your bad opponents into weird situations where you attack in. Like I've seen this happen against Shanks, where you attack in, they subtract your hero's your leader's power, and then they like double 2k or like a 2k to a 1k and save their searcher for some reason, right? Which is a really terrible exchange for them. That's not good in any way, shape, or form. But then they did all of that just to defend a searcher that you forced them into attacking anyway. Other than that, you kill their searcher. Nami is just a must attack card, must answer card. Long story short, you need to be playing this as a play set. Especially when you're behind, when you're ahead, it just does so much for you. Especially when certain cards just aren't searchable, right? Like White Snake isn't searchable, Gum Gavel isn't searchable, or efficiently. Peel Off isn't searchable efficiently. You have to lose multiple cards. That way it frees up your Apis to be that last minute search you need, maybe to grab a Kai, maybe to grab a Peel Off to win the game. Otherwise it could just be that 2k counter that you need just to give you that extra edge. So all in all, again, this is really the Kuja Pirates package. Primarily just adding 4-cost Nami, or 4 of 1-cost Nami. It's a very tight deck list these days, and there isn't much room for experimentation. You could maybe play like a 1 of Deathwink. I've seen that kind of thrown around in the Discord, and I think that's fair. You could drop like an Apis or probably a Gloriosa to grab that. I think 4 Margaret's is going to be pretty important for those yellow memers and everything. It's just a good blocker, but in general, a 1 of Deathwing could be really powerful if you're able to kind of get to it and enable it. A lot of times you do happen to be healthy in hand, which is why I'm like hesitant to really propose that Deathwing, because Nami is going to be replacing itself, and then Kaya is going to be hopefully removing cards, and then you're going to be bouncing cards back to your hand, where Snake Dance replaces itself. Like your hand in general, for many of you that have played 7, 8, whatever, all these metagames, your hand tends to be pretty healthy with the kind of package of the Kuja Pirates. So at this point, with nothing too different in the deck list, I'm going to go through the various matchups that you might come up against. Just as a quick primer, these aren't super in-depth tips, but just wanted to go over some of the more meta matchups that you might come up against. So firstly, Blackbeard. So this deck is probably touted to be one of the best decks in the format right now, if not outside of Doflamingo. There's a lot of high skill kind of lines to get in a deck list like this, and really what it comes down to is something like the Martial D Teach. So at the end of the day, against Nami, this deck's primary game plan is going to be to get cards like the 1-cost Lafitte to then tutor for cards like Martial D Teach, or grab the Hachinosu to then grab for Martial D Teach. They're then going to counter out. They may take a hit or two. They're going to try and remove your Kaias with stuff like Dock Q. You then generally have to attack into it. Otherwise your snake dances are like largely dead. So you attack into this, they deal with a bunch of your stuff. They might kill off your blockers with some combination of the stronger and, you know, maybe like a Van Augur or something like that, just to wipe things out. But in general, they're going to try and clear the board, and then ultimately they're going to try and attack in and set you up in a bad situation with multiple Martial D teaches, where at some point you have to realize that they're going to put you down to maybe like 4 or 5 cards. And then once they have you at that, if you're not able to win there, you're in a really bad spot, because then they're going to play Martial D teach at 10 cost and then start swinging in with the rest of their board. And then you have to realize you cannot actually mill out. You can't go gavel into whatever. So that's when you have to make suboptimal choices, because when it comes to cards like Gum Gum Gavel, you can choose not to mill. When it comes to something like Rubber Band, you can choose not to mill. But with something like Love Love Mellow, you're forced to draw, right? So there's certain cards that you are not able to use anymore. White Snake, not able to use effectively anymore, because yeah, they're going to drop 10 cost. You might be thinking, okay, yeah, I can use White Snake, but you're going to be forced to draw. If you're at low cards in deck, you really have to be careful with what you're countering out on. So the whole point of this deck is they're going to pinch you into a bad situation when you're really low on cards, and then they're going to Martial D teach, maybe play another Martial D teach, nullify you, and then just start swinging big. That's going to be the big game plan for this strategy. And so generally you want to be staying at around like 10 cards. Let them drop their Martial D teach, take a bunch of hits, and then you use the cards that you draw off the triggers to then win on your turn. That's what you generally have to rely on. Other than that, there aren't any big like tricks that I would say exist in this strategy, unless you're playing, you know, Battle Nami, then you don't have to worry about much else. Burgess is definitely a problem, but because this deck generally tends to be low a number of cards in hand, because they're always going to be discarding cards to make sure your Kayas don't work for their on plays, and they're going to be discarding cards to stuff like the Hachinosu. Like, they're generally going to be low in hand. So if they play something like a Burgess in the mid to late game, you generally are able to attack into them. And I have come into situations, you'll see in my videos, in my gameplay, where I am able to even attack and kill a Martial D teach at 10 costs. So that definitely is a possibility once they're low enough in cards and your opponent is too aggressive. Against higher skill opponents, they're going to lock you into a very bad situation. So that generally is the Blackbeard matchup. Now, next big part I want to talk into is OP09 Buggy. Now this is a little different list to what I've traditionally been playing on the channel. This I saw off of a recent kind of finish, and I wanted to kind of try it out. They're not playing the blocker, they're trying, you know, the Charlotte Puddings in there, which is generally not common in this list because again, you can't search for it. It's not something that Mr. Galdino can grab. Even Jozu isn't something Mr. Galdino can grab. But what this deck wants to do is, especially with the Jozus, it allows you to play out the Jozu, bounce your 10 cost Buggy, and then bounce one of their opponent's cards, and then next turn you can play out the Buggy and get this out. You can't cheat this out because you can only cheat out cross-skilled characters, but in general, right now Buggy has a really great angle against Doflamingo, some of the better decks in the format in general, with something like 7 cost Buggy being able to stop all that stuff, and then this being able to play into something like Draco Mihawk. And a lot of lifts have been opting for more kind of 5 cost Mr. ones here at the 5 cost 7k power. So a lot of variation here, but really what this deck lacks is a lot of lists aren't playing Pudding. So generally speaking, unless that metagame shifts to where they're playing Pudding, you can be really greedy. You can play out your cards and force them into bad situations, especially when it comes to playing out like 1 cost Nami. A lot of times early on, they have to make really tricky decisions to even swing into it. If they don't have something like Mr. Galdino, they do have to swing leader into it, and you can spend multiple resources like saving it, and then they're just in a bad situation, because a 1 cost Nami drawing and tutoring multiple cards for you is just absolutely insane and will just pay dividends later on. The big thing you have to worry about later down the line is obviously in the late game, you don't want to put yourself into a situation where you're relying on a blocker, because something like 10 cost Buggy can always come down. Something like Bond Clay can always start bottom decking your stuff, because even though it bottom decks itself, 1 bottom deck, 2 bottom deck, whatever it might be, stuff like that is really, really important to getting kind of over top of you as a Nami player. So you have to be really careful when it comes to the matchup like this. But overall, I think this matchup is generally positive. And I should have mentioned that Blackbeard, I think, is a positive matchup as well. Definitely like a pilot skill thing, but generally in terms of Buggy, this is a positive matchup for you. Next up, we're going to talk about Black Yellow Luffy, or as I love to call it in my videos, thanks to Magic the Gathering, Black White Luffy. This matchup hasn't changed. They play less rush aces. We've been seeing that throughout 8, OP08. It's, yo, this matchup, look, it's good for you. It's good for you. If you're playing Gravity Blade, even better. Sometimes they're just going to have the nut hand where they have multiple Flampes, they have Hioris, they're able to set themselves up, like, sure. those type of draws happen. When they don't, when they only happen a little bit, or when they don't at all, this matchup is just generally not that, again, they're not going to be able to beat you. It's not that different of a matchup. It's one of those matchups where you want to, if they're going slow, you want to be able to draw your peel-offs early. So if you see something like a peel-off, generally you want to keep it in hand. If they're not losing a bunch of cards in life, then be greedy, play out those peel-offs, take a hit or two, because then when they start setting themselves up and they're at 0 and they're really going crazy with their setups, then you want to make sure that all the cards that you're drawing are just counter events. You don't want to be playing peel-off in the late game. You want to make sure that your Dawn is used as effectively as possible. But this is one of those matchups where, again, if they're playing weak, they're playing slow, peel-offs are great, and you're able to be generally really greedy. So not really much to say. Still a favored matchup. I don't think it's that crazy. So let's go into Doflamingo here. I find that Doflamingo lists can be pretty varied. Some play, you know, Marshall D Teach at 2, some play the Freemer, some don't, like whatever. This is a list playing Jozu. I don't think this is like pretty stock either, but generally what I want to highlight is this is one of the best decks in the format. There's a lot of bouncing happening here. Like this 4-cost Trafalgar Law is just absolutely insane because they can bounce your blocker and bounce their Jinbei. They can play the Jinbei again and just play out multiple things. It's a deck that will always consistently be playing 2 to 3 puttings, something you have to be aware of. And then especially when they're able to kind of rearrange with stuff like Perona, if they're looking for that putting, then a skilled Doflamingo pilot will understand they do not need to attack you. They don't need to do anything. They will let you draw a bunch of cards, and then they will Perona until they find a putting. Then they'll build up their board, they'll putting, get your hand out, and then they'll start attacking it, right? So that's how, generally speaking, a good skilled Doflamingo pilot will go. And then of course you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're relying on blockers. Not only can they bounce this, but you might be got by a rare Perfume Femur. So it is one of those random cards that Doflamingo will pull out generally against other matchups, but you also have to be worried about it here. And then always be wary of something like Trafalgar Law. Like even if this card hits you like twice, if you're really greedy and you have multiple cards in hand for multiple turns, they can starve you out with something like this with the Law. They can play Trafalgar Law here, this 4-cost one. They can then you know, bounce your blocker, then bounce something like this, play it again. Like like they can do so much. Sorry, they don't really want to be bouncing this, but they can just be bouncing like other stuff. There's so much value in this deck in terms of controlling your board and like tempoing you out. So you just want to be very careful. Obviously they're very aggressive off to the rip. This is not a matchup where you want to see peel-offs early. If you see it in your opening hand, get rid of it. You don't want it. Even in a situation where you're on the draw and you can peel off onto and then hold up a gavel, that's not this type of matchup. They're going to flood the board and they're going to get out and over top of you. Don't be doing that type of stuff against OP09 Doflamingo. Now, the last matchup that I want to talk about generally is Shanks. There's a couple of different lists, I think, running around. I'm not sure if the West has really settled on one just yet. But generally speaking, early in the game against this list, you can get really greedy and get a lot of value out of multiple 1-cost Namis. Like they don't really have too much kind of consistent removal against it until they get late. Once they get late, then, you know, they're going to be able to drop something like, you know, the Ben Beckmans, and they can tap down, you know, the Edward Newgate and start killing that type of stuff. So you're not going to get any value out of it, especially something like Newgate, just killing out your blockers. You have to be really careful about that. So if you have blockers, play them out early. If you have the Namis, play them out early. And of course they have like the Goldie Roger, like, you know, if you activate blocker and you're relying on blockers, Roger's here to kind of win the game from there. So, you know, they got those memes there. You always have to be worried about at 10 costs as well. If they're just attacking raw, and they got 10 down up, you probably got a Rush Shanks coming at you real quick in the face. So those are the cards that I generally would be worried about. Like later in the game, they're going to have that removal alongside like the Raleigh and the Newgate and the Beckman here. But early on, you can probably get out a bunch of characters, get them out, get your value, play your blockers, and this matchup should be good. I think this matchup is 50-50 or close to a little bit over favored. I think like a rush element, a lot of the fact that they play large, like if this matchup learns to starve, like it'll be perfectly fine. It's almost like yellow. They just do a lot better job at like removing your stuff. Your blockers will never stick. So it's always going to be gavel fodder, and they just go large like really effectively. You can almost never attack back into their kind of lower cost stuff, even if they attack with like a Sanji, because even if you attack raw 5k into a Sanji, they minus your leader's power by 1k, and then they just counter out with a 2k. Like in general, it's so hard to come back into them, but if they're really aggressive into you, you can usually get through your deck pretty effectively with the right events. So it really depends on pilot skill. But that's ultimately where I'm gonna land with OP09 Nami. I think generally Nami has a good place in the metagame right now. Like, it's definitely not tier 1, but it has the ability to be that F&M hero type of deck, and a lot of pilot skill can reward it, and you definitely will be doing relatively well at bigger tournaments. Obviously, if you're up against a lot of Doflamingos and stuff like that, a lot of aggression, a lot of red, then you're going to struggle. But if it tends to be the mid-range matchups, a lot more controlling matchups, slower games, then you're going to be perfectly fine. Obviously, not a lot of yellow in this metagame right now. Not a lot of Katakuri. If it's yellow, it tends to be, especially if it's memes, it tends to be, the scientist himself. But regardless, I think Nami's in a good state right now. Let me know how your OP09 testing has been going. Let me know what you've been trying out in OP09. If you've been playing Boodle, if you've been playing with Deathwing, try and justify it to me. Let me know how those have been going for you. But I just want to throw this video out there, and hoping all of y'all some success in milling in OP09.